Welcome to another edition of Disability and You. I am Ganesh Singh. On this edition, I'll be having a conversation with Meredith Applegate, who is the country director for the International Foundation of Electoral Systems. Meredith is going to share with us the work that IFES, as it's commonly known among the CSO circle, about the work that they're doing in Guyana with young persons. Meredith, welcome to Disability and You.
Thank you so much for having me, Ganesh.
Excellent. So let's start by providing us with a brief background on IFES, International Foundation of Electoral Systems, and what the organization is all about.
Sure. IFES, the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, is an international, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization based out of Washington, D.C. We have country offices in about 35 countries around the world, but we've worked informally or remotely in many, many more. I've been lucky to be with IFES for about 14 or almost 15 years now. And what IFES really focuses on is the core of democracy. So how can we work together to build resilient democracies that deliver for everyone? And this means working in partnership with organizations like GCOPD in Guyana, like disability rights organizations, youth organizations, civil society, and then a range of government partners, opposition partners, election commissions. The variety is different in every country to talk about what solutions work in each country that we operate in and how IFES can offer an international perspective to collaborate and try to improve systems and how things work.
Excellent. So we now know what IFES work entails. Let us talk about what you guys are currently doing in Guyana as it relates to governance, elections, and so on.
Well, I'm biased, but I think we have a fantastic program in Guyana because of our partners like GCOPD and the broad range of young people that we work with. But in Guyana, we're currently in the middle of a 3-year USAID-funded program called Youth Allies, which stands for Youth Advocacy, Linkages, and Leadership in Elections and Society. And this program works kind of on 3 different goals. One is to build up the leadership skills of young people while also giving them an understanding of how government works and what democracy is. And then giving them an opportunity to really put these leadership skills into practice by doing problem solving at the community level, by being creative and coming up with projects that they think would make their neighbors' lives a little bit easier or other people in their community. And then lastly, we work to try to make sure that democracy and elections are inclusive and accessible through things like education, by working with organizations who advocate for access, like yourself.
Mhm. So let us deconstruct a bit more on the Utilize project. You mentioned building the capacity of the young persons that you're working with through the different partners. But what are some of the activities that were implemented or you plan to implement in relation to achieving that goal?
So we have a really amazing group of young people who've been trained as trainers because we think that it's always more effective if you're learning new skills or you're undertaking a training to have someone lead that you can relate to. And it also is really empowering for young people to know that they can not just be participants in trainings, but they can also be leaders themselves.
Definitely.
So we have this training program that's led by young people and a diverse group of young people from every region of Guyana, young people with disabilities, young people without disabilities, young people from the indigenous community, from Afro-Guyanese backgrounds, Indo-Guyanese backgrounds, who are all now working together to do trainings in their communities. And these trainings last several days, and they can be tailored based on what a community really needs. But generally, they follow some basic principles of leadership. So they teach things like public speaking, having a positive attitude, and building self-confidence. They talk about teamwork and how to collaborate, and basic project management skills. How do you plan an event? How do you budget for an event? How do you start thinking about putting into practice an idea that you might have? And then it also uses games to talk about some of the elements of civic education in Guyana.
That's the best way of getting the young people involved. Make it as interactive as possible.
Yes, the element of competition.
You mentioned building the capacity and putting them into a position where they can be problem solvers. What kind of support do you provide in helping them to solve problems within their communities? And are there any examples of the young people that you would have trained, solving a small problem within their community or working to do such?
I mean, there are so many examples. It's probably going to be hard to pick just a couple. I think
Yeah.
they're so exciting what the young people have been working on. So through this program, people can apply for what's called a community action initiative, and it's a really simple application. It's just who are you, what issue are you planning to address, how are you planning to do it, who else is working on it, so making sure that you've done your homework, you know what your local government is maybe doing on this issue, you know if there are other actors working on it, and then they come up with this proposal, and one of our civil society partners, such as GCOPD or the Guyana National Youth Council or Youth Challenge Guyana, will look through these applications and provide some mentorship to young people as they develop their application and come up with their ideas. And they have done incredible work, and it's been incredibly varied in terms of what they've done. We've had in Burpees a group of young people working together to put up streetlights on a street that was dark and not
Yeah.
safe at night. We've had people do civic education puppet shows about the history of Linden on television. We've had awareness raising programs for youth with disabilities on sexual and reproductive health that was done in partnership with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education. We've had work on emphasizing the right of young people who are blind
So
to
it's
an
it's
education.
so it's a diverse
Yes.
set of projects. But who can apply?
So anyone can apply. It's open on the IFES Guyana Facebook page. You can find a link, or you can always email ifesguyana@ifes.org if you want some more information. We, of course, encourage anyone who's been through one of our trainings to apply, but it is open to the public as well. And if anyone wants to be involved in a training, we do them all over Guyana. So feel free to reach out to us on Facebook or over email if you're interested in joining one of our trainings and hearing more about what Youth Allies is about.
So it's open to anyone within a specific age range, 18.
That's a good point, Ganesh.
Yes.
Yes, it is specifically for youth. So you have to be 29 years old or younger. But you can apply as an individual, you can apply with your friends, or you can apply as an organization if you have an organization that's made up of youth.
Excellent. I'm sure a lot of persons would grab at that opportunity to be able to get resources to do work within their communities and even nationally. Meredith, another aspect or another goal you highlighted for the Youth Allies project is inclusion as it relates to elections and governance and so on. Could you tell us a bit more how you're working to achieve that goal within the project?
Well, we've done a number of different trainings and work in collaboration with your organization, GCOPD, and with young people with disabilities to talk about what access really looks like in an election, access for all. We've been doing some trainings and awareness raising on international best practice, because I think one of the most exciting things is always learning what's on the cutting edge, what are other countries doing that's enabling access, what might be a good fit for Guyana. But one of the main things is we try to make sure that all of our education is accessible. So we make sure that any videos have accessibility, have captions. We make sure that our trainings are inclusive, not just having young people with disabilities as participants, but also as facilitators, and that we have people with disabilities mainstreamed in all of our trainings. So it's not a separate approach, it's that everybody gets to work together and everybody gets to benefit from everyone's ideas. When it comes to elections, IFES works around the world on helping election management bodies and civil society make decisions that would help to best reach best practice when it comes to international standards, or to realize the CRPD in action, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, as it pertains to political rights.
But Meredith, you highlighted working with young people with disabilities, not just as the beneficiaries, but also as facilitators and partners implementing the different activities. But are you working with other marginalized groups within the within our society to ensure that they too can be included within the Youth Allies project?
Of course. It's a very, very diverse project. When people think about youth, it's such a huge number of people who all have different experiences, different access issues. So we just did a training of trainers, especially for Indigenous youth, that we worked on with the National Tushau's Council. So now we have Indigenous youth from every single region of Guyana who've been trained as trainers, who can hopefully do some work in accessing areas that are a bit more remote and more difficult to access. We've also been trying to put an emphasis on areas where there might be a lot of school dropouts, which has happened a lot during COVID. So people who have had to either leave because of work or didn't have the access to the technology that they might have needed to really join in a productive way online during COVID, and try to help to bolster some of these young people who've dropped out of formal education into rejoining some sort of educational positive way to channel their energy.
So, inclusion is all across the board, not just with disabilities, but indigenous persons and also persons who, from the lower socioeconomic bracket within our society. Meredith, you would have mentioned accessible or inclusive elections. I know that the local government elections are coming up, but we're not going to discuss much on that. But I just want you to help us to better understand what inclusive elections or accessibility means as it relates to elections for persons with disabilities.
Sure. From an international standpoint and following international guidance, which is enshrined in a number of different ways, but the most common one that you would think about is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, there are some really important principles that elections should have for people with disabilities. First, people should be able to vote independently, meaning completely by themselves if they so choose. They should also be able to vote in secret. So no one should have to know how anyone votes, but this is a particular issue for people with disabilities. And people should be able to vote free from any form of intimidation. And at the polling station, along with everyone else. Different countries take different approaches to make sure that this happens. I think it's also important to note that when you think of making elections accessible, everyone benefits when elections are more accessible for everyone.
And what are some of the measures that you would have seen, or some of the best practices that you would have seen across the world as it relates to facilitate more independent voting by people with disabilities?
Well, there are a number of obstacles that you have to overcome for people to vote independently, in secret, and in person. First, polling stations have to be accessible. So we've seen in other countries, election management has had maybe working groups with the disability community to do audits. You've seen this in Sri Lanka, for example. Civil society worked together with the Election Commission in Sri Lanka to do what they call polling station audits and to say, this polling station needs to be adapted in the following ways, or we recommend you moving it to this other building that doesn't have several flights of stairs. Another way that you can enable people with disabilities to vote independently is through assistive devices. These can vary in a lot of different ways, from a simple magnifying glass at a polling station to assist with people who are low vision, to having things like tactile ballot guides, which are a really great tool in making sure that people who are blind or low vision are able to vote independently. Tactile ballot guides are like a folder, kind of. So your ballot looks the same as everyone else's and feels the same as everyone else's. You slide it into this simple template that has raised markings or Braille, depending on if there's Braille literacy in a country, that you can move down independently as a voter. You can mark in one of the holes, depending on your candidate selection, take your ballot out of the template and cast it, and it looks the same as everyone else's. So that's what a number of election commissions around the world use at polling stations. Or there's also auditory devices, where you have a recording of what is on the ballot that you can listen to, with raised markings maybe even on the ballot. So there's a different number of ways.
Approaches,
yeah. You have to figure out the right one for each country. But there is a way for most people to vote in person, independently, and in secret. Yeah.
Meredith, is there anything else that you want to share with the Guyanese public as it relates to the work of IFES or Utilize before we conclude the interview?
Well, mostly I just want to thank you for having me on your show. And I also want to thank all of the young people who've made my time in Guyana so exciting and compelling. There's so much talent across Guyana and so much exciting things that are yet to come.
Excellent. Meredith, I want to thank you very much for sharing with us as it relates to the work of IFES here. And I wish you continued success with the Utilize project and with your work in Guyana. May is Observe Blindness Awareness Month in Guyana, as we would have highlighted um, some weeks ago. And for this month, the Guyana Society for the Blind and the Guyana Blind Cricket Association, in partnership with the Guyana Council of Organizations for Persons with Disabilities, are implementing a number of activities to raise awareness on the issues affecting persons who are blind and also to highlight their achievements and some of their, well, not some of their abilities, but their abilities, because this is something that persons question all the time. Even though you have persons who are blind that are extremely successful, living normal lives, they will still have to answer questions as it relates how do they work? How do they travel from point A to point B? How did they cope at university? They always get questions like that. So, in order to better sensitize the public, those organizations I highlighted, they would have implemented quite a few activities to raise awareness, and that included a media awareness campaign, having persons on various programs, both in the electronic, the different forms of electronic media. They would have also had some articles done in the daily newspapers, and they would have been sharing information on social media with the objective of sensitizing the public on how blind persons and persons who are visually impaired can function and be independent as much as possible or as much as society allows them to, because there are so many barriers that they have to deal with on a daily basis. In addition to that awareness campaign, the Guyana Society for the Blind would have held a church service and a social activity for their members, and that was done recently. And there is also a day of sports that is planned by the Guyana Council of Organizations for Persons with Disabilities and the Guyana Blind Cricket Association to have blind persons and persons who are visually impaired from regions 2, 3, 4, 6, and 10 involved in blind cricket, blind football, dominoes for persons who are blind, blind chess, and a few other activities. That will be done very soon to ensure that as many persons can be able to participate. These sports are not just seen as means of competition for the blind community, but sports is seen as a vehicle for the empowerment of persons who are blind and visually impaired. Blind cricket is one such sport that would have provided opportunities to many persons who are blind and visually impaired and would have helped them to build their capacity and provide them with an avenue so that they can be rehabilitated, learn independent living skills, and generally be empowered. And the hope is that more persons who are blind and visually impaired can be involved in sports so that they too can benefit from what sports has to offer as it relates to empowerment of persons who are blind and visually impaired. So, I do encourage you, if you're blind or you're visually impaired, or if you have a relative who is blind or visually impaired, encourage them to be involved in whatever activities are out there for their benefit. Get in touch with the Guyana Society for the Blind on 226-4496. That's 226-4496. And you can be able to get more information on current programs. You can be able to benefit from rehabilitation services. There are orientation and mobility officers that can provide training to you to help develop independent living skills. If you would have acquired blindness in your 40s, 50s, 60s, it's not the end of the road. You still can regain your independence. You still can be able to return to some level of work, you still can continue your education. There are so many opportunities now for persons who are blind and visually impaired. But in order for you to get those opportunities or to access those opportunities, you must be known. And that is why it's important for you to get in touch with the Guyana Society for the Blind on 226-4496, or even get in touch with the Guyana Council of Organizations for Persons with Disabilities on their Facebook page. You can find them there, or you can get in touch with myself, or even Leroy Phillips. So there are a number of blind persons out there that you can get in touch with that can better guide you. You know, so again, I do encourage you that if you're blind or visually impaired, get out. Get out, stop sitting at home, and be involved. You know, we are observing another a month. There's another, the month May is also being observed Mental Health Awareness Month. And this is something that, you know, I've been discussing a lot as of recent, because more and more I've seen the importance of us raising awareness, you know, on mental health issues and what are some of the services available for persons who are affected by mental health issues. You know, we need to speak more on this. We need to discuss mental health more. And, you know, I'm of the view that once we discuss mental health more, then we would be helping to destigmatize mental health. You know, if we continue to treat mental health as a taboo subject, then we would not get to that point where people will feel comfortable discussing their mental well-being or being comfortable to seek help. And that is why I, you know, continue to use my platforms, whether it's on television, on radio, or on social media, to raise awareness on mental health issues and the importance of persons taking care of their mental well-being. You know, it's important if you know that you're not in the best frame of mind, seek help. There's nothing wrong with doing so. It's not admitting that you're weak, but for me, it's saying that you're strong, to just accept that you need help and seeking that help. The Ministry of Health would have recently launched a website where persons can, you know, actually get counseling, get guidance, get support. You know, you can check that website out. It's being managed by the mental health unit of the Ministry of Health, and I know that the ministry has been doing a lot to raise awareness on mental health, but also at the same time provide services for persons all across Guyana. So, you know, again, I just want to say that let us help to destigmatize mental health, and let's talk mental health. We need to talk more about mental health, and I think we will get to that point where people are comfortable in seeking help and also discussing their mental well-being. Do join me next time for another edition of Disability in You. All the best.